Hey everyone, welcome to Dangerous Werewolf. Are you brave enough to step into the perilous world of werewolves with me? Here, we'll uncover the secrets, face the fears, and explore the thrilling and dangerous aspects of these mythical creatures. So hold on tight and let's start this wild adventure together. 1.1 Not Who You Think I Am. Old Gray for Hug the Feet, the only pieces still intact of the rabbit. Tim Morey cross-stared. The camera hung off her neck as she crouched to poke the carcass with a stick. Its long padded feet were kicked together, spine twisting through leaf litter and clotted with dry red blood. Most of its bones were missing. It didn't look much like itself, not even the skull. She fixed the camera to her eye. The eye socket stared back. Tim Morey snapped a few photos of her subject, unsure of what happened to the creature to have it sprawled so elegantly in repose. It couldn't have been a kill. She nudged it with her toe, disturbing channels of ants' decay. She exposed the scavengers that picked it apart and took photos of them too. Fragments of leaves fascinated Tim Morey. That was usually why she came to Gaspereau Mountain. Her careful feet stepped over the rabbit. Tim Morey let the camera rest and steadied her hand on the aspen overlooking the dip where the carcass was left, then stepped up and into the brush. On warm mornings like this, the forest unraveled insects and birds made the trees come alive in symphony. Sunned Anston leaves shivered as omens of the breeze. Dragonflies hovered like tiny drones past her head. Mosquitoes tickled her arms and left welts even without sticking her. Tim Morey hummed a song stuck in her head that she remembered from yesterday. Nearly tripping over a deep cleft, Tim Morey slapped the back of her neck and inspected the paw prints in the ground, mud still pliable from the rain a few days ago. Maybe it was a kill. Tim Morey took a photo and stepped after the tracks, until a spot of curious shade caught her eye a meter away. She loomed over the patch in the grass where 3 ink blots charred the dirt black, burnt growth retaining its shape as carbon. Tim Morey touched it with the tip of her shoe, but while it looked to be wet, it only smeared like ash. She wondered what had touched the earth there. "Tim, what are you doing?" She took a photo of the 3 spots, then returned to the wolf tracks. "Hey, bring Brutus over here. You want to see something crazy." A head of blonde hair bobbed toward her, her friend climbing through brush off the edge of the trail near their campsite. Julia brought the German shepherd tight on his leash into the trees with her. Tim Morey knelt, jostling Brutus by the scruff when he bounded up to her. She kept him in place until Julia, puffing and swiping debris off her thighs, stood in front of Tim Morey. Look, said Tim Morey, borrowing Brutus' paw to compare it to the tracks. "They're so big." "Are those wolves?" Julia leaned down. "I think so. They look too big to be coyotes. And I don't think coyotes come this deep into the woods," Tim Morey pointed out. "Only guessing." She let Brutus go and gave him a pat. "Thanks, bud." The dog licked her chin and Tim Morey grimaced and stood, wiping it away. When Brutus zeroed in on the rabbit carcass, she grabbed the red band and around his neck and guided him back to Julia. She wasn't about to let him eat leftovers and get sick. "You don't think they were around last night, do you?" asked Julia, crackling through the branches. "I heard about those attacks." "Not near our campsite. Brutus would have noticed," said Tim Morey. "That's a relief. I'd hate to be eaten by wolves the week before school." Tim Morey laughed. "That would be ironic." Julia snorted. "Are you still taking pictures of weird shit or can we move on?" "Onward to the next weird shit," declared Tim Morey. "Soon it would be too cold to camp overnight." All the best discoveries were made in the dawn. She wanted to explore as much as she could before she was limited to camping on the 3 or 5 weekends she had left. It wasn't Tim Morey's idea to take classes so soon after graduating high school. At the start of her senior year, Tim Morey decided she would take time off to explore what she wanted to be. First, but the pressure from her parents and Julia convinced Tim Morey to apply to Acadia University, the heart of their student-run town of Wolfgill, Nova Scotia. Even if she got accepted, Tim Morey was leery about attending. Then she was accepted, because her marks were just good enough, and registration rolled around and Julia urged her to look at classes with her. And okay, maybe taking classes with Julia sounded fun. They wouldn't have Julia's friends taking Julia's attention all the time, and it would just be Tim Morey and her childhood friend again. Tim Morey always following, loyal. Tim Morey with nobody else she'd rather be friends with than Julia. It wasn't so much Julia that Tim Morey was possessive of as it was being part of a duality. Being part of something was nice. The problem that ensued was the freedom she sacrificed. Tim Morey didn't want to be taking university classes. She didn't even know what she wanted in her life. She craved to wander. She craved this forest. But if it meant being alone, she would defy her wandering nature for Julia. Tim Morey told herself this when they said goodbye to the forest early that afternoon. Tim Morey's car was parked at the end of the camping trail, a white '98 Malibu, its paint chipped and metal rusted, betraying the long use of it by her father before it was handed down to her. As they tossed their gear in the back seat with Brutus, Tim Morey lingered, drinking one last gulp of fresh forest air. She climbed into the driver's seat and they pulled out of the parking lot, weaving through the forest surrounding Gasper O Mountain until it opened up to the highway. Julia rolled the window down and cranked the radio, singing along to Boy Meets Girl. Tim Morey caught a glimpse of her with her blonde hair billowing, a picturesque smile against her skin, while Brutus behind her panted in the sunshine. Tim Morey rolled her window down and rested her arm on the edge. The car rumbled to a halt at a highway intersection, and the music faded and a voice babbled on with an advertisement for Twins, home amp garden just outside of town. Tim Morey flicked through stations searching for another song. "Can I ask you something?" asked Julia. Tim Morey brushed stray hairs from her ponytail behind her ear. "Yeah. What do you think about when we were out there?" The light turned green. Tim Morey accelerated. "What?" "Walking through the woods, looking for bones. What do you think about?" "What kind of question is that?" "Jewels." Julia said nothing, so Tim Morey could tell it was more than curiosity. "I was daydreaming," she said. "About what?" "I don't share what I daydream about." "You'll think it's weird." Julia laughed. "I know what you were thinking about." Tim Morey stared at the road, though she wanted badly to give Julia a look. It was already creeping on her face. "What?" "You're thinking about having to study for tests and do homework and take notes," said Julia. "Ah, you got me. And how much you'll hate it." "I don't do notes." Tim Morey shrugged. "You better not fuck off halfway through the semester," warned Julia, smiling. "Yeah." "Over your dead body," scoffed Tim Morey. "The only reason I'm sticking around is for you." She grinned back. "Good. I know it's a little scary," said Julia. "It's scary for me too. But we'll be starting this new thing together." This was why Tim Morey was willing to set her desires aside. Amy roared in the back of her head, but as fickle as Tim Morey was, she was awfully weak to the ones she loved and who loved her back. "Just don't," she started, then faded. "Don't what?" Tim Morey's expression T-winged a little. "Don't turn into someone else on me, okay?" It almost happened in high school. She almost lost Julia had Tim Morey not used the advantage of childhood history. She wasn't sure she would have stayed such a pivotal part of Julia's friend circle. The other popular girls certainly never liked Tim Morey as much as they liked Julia. Julia reached for Tim Morey's hand. "I won't. You stay, and I'll keep our friendship above everything else." Because Julia knew that Tim Morey was afraid of it happening again. "I promise." Tim Morey squeezed her hand back, reassured by her friend's love. "I promise too." They sped past the bright blue sign of the water behind Acadia University's clock tower, greeting welcome to Wolfgill in the sunlight. And she watched the back of the sign shrink to a far off place in her rear-view mirror. Were that promise ever broken? It was this moment she would look back to, the moment that love condemned her to her fate. That Sunday evening, dreams throttled her relentlessly. Tim Morey always dreamt of running. It came about with the pressure of feeling contained when she got into relationships, when she had important dates coming up, when she was stuck at home for too long going stir-crazy. It was always different what she was running from, and she never remembered the face. What she remembered was the feeling. How she could put all of herself into moving, and somehow, still her limbs would be limp. She could never run fast enough. It didn't take deciphering the prophecies of her dreams to know what they meant. It was more psychological than anything. She woke at 4 a.m. to stillness, her parents asleep in the room down the hall. Tim Morey stretched and closed her eyes, but sleep felt impossible. She sat up and perused the souvenirs she brought back from the hike that weekend, the photos on her camera, her discoveries that she couldn't dislodge, only return to. The rabbit, the black drops, some interesting fungi still clinging to trees into the end of summer. The black drops, surely just charcoal from a campfire. She zoomed in, but there was nothing interesting hidden in the pixels. Or maybe she just wasn't looking hard enough. Tim Morey squinted, the bright light on the viewfinder blinding her in the darkness. When browsing her photos failed to lull her back asleep, Tim Morey swung out of bed and prowled to the kitchen. She opened the fridge and stared into the light. Again, searching for something to sate her night-time hungers. A loaf of bread and lunch meat would suffice. Tim Morey collected her ingredients and fashioned a meal in the darkness. She was about to take a bite when a shuffling down the hall gave her pause. Tim Morey watched, teeth poised over her meal, before a tall figure materialized, rubbing his face. "Tim, what are you doing up?" She sunk her teeth and chewed. "Midnight snack," she said, mouth full. Her father stepped past with his empty glass to fill it in the sink. "It's a little late for that," said Wallace. "I heard you scavenging in the dark and thought somebody broke in." Tim Morey leaned against the counter, unfazed. "I would have noticed first." She watched him drink his water, the glass glinting reflections from streetlight outside, while she ate the rest of her sandwich. The glass was refilled a second time. "You aren't nervous about Wednesday, are you?" "Am I that unreliable?" Tim Morey scowled, wiping crumbs off her mouth with the back of her arm. "What's next? Is Mom gonna come give me the look?" "If you sass me loud enough, she might." Her Hispanic mother heard everything. Her white father, not so much, except tonight it seemed. "I'm not nervous about Wednesday. I'm not nervous about anything. I just couldn't sleep," dismissed Tim Morey, walking ahead of her father so she could be the one leading the conversation. He drifted behind her, only to turn the opposite direction in the hallway. Well, don't stay up too late or you'll fudge your sleep schedule. I'm nocturnal." "I got it from you," Tim Morey said in front of her door. Wallace chuckled. "I'm only when I need to be. This," Tim Morey pointed at all of herself, "this is your fault." Her father guffawed. "Go to sleep, Tim." She watched him disappear through the door, certain that no part of his instructions would be what coaxed her to sleep. 1.2 Not who you think I am. Orientation was on Tuesday, but Tim Morey had no interest in being somewhere she didn't need to be and ditched at lunch. Classes didn't really start until Wednesday, so it was on Wednesday morning that Tim Morey drove Julia to campus with all the anxiety in her heart she said she didn't have. They took too long to find a parking spot. Despite its location in the heart of a small town where most students lived in dorms or within walking distance, parking at Acadia University turned out to be surprisingly hard to come by. They found a space in a far corner, And as the time crept a few minutes past 8:30, the pair scampered across campus to find their first building. It was less easy to find the room, and even less so finding a place to sit among the packed rows of seats. They had to sit a couple rows apart, with Tim Morey opting for the chair further back, eyeing the boy that Julia sat next to with hot jealousy. While their professor outlined the syllabus and proceeded into the first lesson, Tim Morey struggled to pay attention, hastily jotting notes before her eyes drifted elsewhere, to the windows or multitudes of heads that sat before her, to Julia and the boy, her new, if temporary, rival. When the class ended, she was first on her feet and shimmying to freedom, waiting for Julia at the end of her row. They walked together outside, but Julia broke off in another direction. "My next class is in the beverage," she said, bracing for Tim Morey's melodrama. Tim Morey stared ruefully in the direction of the building. "Lunch," Julia nodded. "I'll meet you here." Tim Morey watched Julia flit away, her friend tossing one last confident smile. What did it take to be as optimistic as Julia or her parents? Whatever it was, clearly it was something Tim Morey lacked. She withdrew a crumpled map of the campus from her backpack, a souvenir from orientation the day before. Pinpointing her next class, Tim Morey cut through the mingling streams to another building. Her second class, Geology of Earth, was in a building adorned with shiny rocks and old fossil replicates. Her quirky professor encouraged students to experience the texture of piles of dirt she lifted up in her hands. The class ended late, and they were released into a surging crowd of students already on the way to their next class. And Tim Morey panicked, realizing she hadn't checked the location of her third class. She stopped by a second floor window and consulted her map, only to find she had to travel all the way across campus again. Maybe she should have planned her schedule better. I wish I knew where I was going. Frustrated, Tim Morey oriented herself with the surroundings of the building outside, and was distracted by migrating herds of humans below. Among them, a man in a blonde bun walked backwards, speaking with his hands to a woman and to children. Tim Morey watched him point. At one building, at another building. At her building, at her in the window, although he likely didn't know what she felt exposed when the two children looked her way, and she caught the eyes of the little girl. Then a reflection moved in the window. Tim Morey's attention shifted behind her, crystal clear out of the glass, the face of another student. Watching the family too, or watching her. When she turned, the face was gone, but Tim Morey remembered distinctly red hair and saw him up ahead. She paid absolutely no attention to him as he walked the same path to her next class. She purposefully lost him in a rush between buildings, then spent too many minutes finding the room. By the time she arrived at her third class, Introductory Cultural Anthropology, it was already in session. Tim Morey peeked and espied a mass of students staring at the professor as he reviewed office hours. Surely, she could just listen to him talk out here. Right. But then she'd need a syllabus. What if he popped some random first day quiz? She couldn't just bust in like she was spying on them from outside. But if she walked in now, everyone would stare at her. Tim Morey bit her lip. It was by some miracle of God that he implored the students to turn to their neighbor and introduce themselves. That was a big part of anthropology, getting to know people, he said. Tim Morey slipped in, scanning for an open seat. An opportunity at the end of a row. Beside her, her neighbor's conversation was dying down. As she tucked her backpack between her feet and settled in, he turned to her with a smile. "Hey, I'm Tim Morey," she said, looking at him, pulling the notebook out of her backpack, looking at him a second time. Red hair. He blinked and half smiled. "I'm Milo. Do I know you from somewhere?" "I didn't follow you," she said. "Kinda think you did," said Milo, still smiling. Tim Morey frowned at her neighbor. with his shaggy head of strawberry hair and mess of freckles on his cheeks. His eyes were charming and warm honey brown, and he looked tall with his long legs folded awkwardly in front of him. And he was a little attractive. She'd brushed it off. "If I followed you, I wouldn't be late," she countered. "You must be a slow walker." "I'll wait up for you Friday. Sorry, won't be in the area. Was just taking a detour." "Didn't I see you walking out of that rock class?" Milo smiled still. Or maybe it was just that Tim Morey kept noticing it. Tim Morey squinted. "I think you followed me." "I didn't follow you," he said. The professor started back up and Tim Morey sighed with relief. She eyed Milo, who eyed her back with a good-natured smirk from his smile. She continued to absolutely not pay any attention to him during class, completely not aware of each of his movements shifting in his chair, totally not seeing his elbow on the divider between their seats. When the professor dismissed them, Tim Morey rose and tried to make a fast exit and only stopped because Milo was the one who spoke after her. "Hey Tim Morey." "Right," he asked, testing out her unusual name. She looked at him. "Mind if I sit with you next class?" He looked down at her, leaving the room beside her. The question was unwelcome. "Like next anthropology class?" "Yeah." "Well, unless we're walking to the same class again right now." "I don't have a class." "I'm going for lunch," she said, evading him. "No way. Down in the student center." He gawked. "Probably." Milo snapped his fingers. "You must have copied my schedule." "Theft." Did he think he was smooth? You trying to make friends or something? That made him laugh, which made her uncomfortably fuzzy. Talking to attractive people stressed her out. "See, I recently moved here from Halifax for school. I don't really know anyone," Milo admitted. "We walk the same way to class. Maybe we can hang out." Tim Morey strained to believe her ears. Who did this boy think he was? Playing cat and mouse with her in the hallways, looking cute, talking her up. Had he walked out of a piece of college romance fiction? Was he pulling some trick on her? She narrowed her eyes, but Milo only looked shockingly earnest, his smile disarming. Something had to be up. He knitted his eyebrows. "Sorry, should I back off?" She had no good reason to actually tell him to. Tim Morey sighed. "I'm going to lunch with my friend Julia. You can join us if you like." Milo looked relieved. He must have been really desperate for a friend. Tim Morey certainly wouldn't have gone to the same lengths to make one. "You sure?" "I'm just trying to get to know people." "Yeah, it's cool." Julia could entertain him at least. Tim Morey would sit by and judge him. "Why'd you come to Acadia if you're from Halifax?" "Anyway." He explained how even after working part-time for 2 years, he was struggling to afford tuition at Dalhousie and his father was going to start charging him rent if he lessened his course load. He said his mother, who lived in Wolfgill, recommended Acadia. When he realized the cost of classes was leagues cheaper, he transferred his credits and moved in with her. They hadn't spent much time together since his parents divorced a few years ago, when they were all still living in Halifax, so it was nice to be with her again. Tim Morey caught his eye and smiled insincerely at his sweetness. "So you'll go back to Halifax once you're done?" she asked. Milo stuck his hands in his pockets. "Who knows?" Julia was already waiting on the lawn, phone in one hand while the other tucked blonde coils behind her ear. Her pink backpacks at evenly between her shoulders, her shirt perfectly smoothed and white runners yet muddied, as if she just manifested from a plane of heavenly flawlessness. Conversely, Tim Morey felt like a frazzled mess, her face a little red from Milo, her armpits damp, her backpack slung off one shoulder with its zipper half open. Spotting Julia, she picked up her pace. "Jules." The blonde looked up quizzically, but needn't ask before Tim Morey introduced the stranger at her side. "This is Milo. He moved here from Halifax and he has no friends, so I invited him to lunch." Milo smiled. Like usual, Julia laughed like she was flirting. "Sure, I'm Julia." They had barely enough time to order sandwiches from one of the booths in the student center. Tim Morey shoved the second half of her sandwich down her gullet with the grace of a pelican and waved her departure to Milo, dragging Julia off to their afternoon obligations. Milo cheerily waved back. After class, in the car as Tim Morey navigated back to Julia's house, Julia reflected on how nice it was that Tim Morey made another friend. She said it in a way that was familiarly condescending, but Tim Morey reminded her, "I'm doing this for you." Besides, she wasn't expecting Milo to stick around long. University wasn't anything like high school. There were more friends to be made in his other classes, and she wasn't about to build her hopes up when they were sure to be torn down the moment she saw him talking to someone else, or Julia flirting with him again, but she was just a jealous person. She liked her solitude better than being disappointed by people. She definitely had a people problem. Later that night, when she opened her anthropology text and picked over the first few pages, Tim Morey remembered that she only ever gave up what she wanted to not be alone. It was animal nature to crave one's own kind. It was the foundations of humanity to forfeit solitude for community. It was Tim Morey's inherent social engine driving her to survival, so she found herself at war with her hungers and her needs, her heart and her feet. Tim Morey's fears were rekindled, feeling jealous, being sidelined, coming out alone anyway. She didn't want to let Milo in. She remembered only his red hair from the dream that night, she a rabbit, and he a reaching hand. 1.3, not who you think I am. Under stars, they moved like they were one of the trees, a geometric shadow cleaved by branches and ribbons of moonlight. They stepped down the trail with no light to guide them, sifting through blue, green shapes and thermal imaging goggles. 2 feet in black boots, black jacket, black hood and a rifle strapped to their back as dark as the night itself. But in spite of the camouflage, they didn't belong here in these trees. In these shadows, they were interloper, fixed a path made by something else. The hunters scanned the trees down the trail. No warmth appeared in their vision except for shivering spots of small, underground mammals sheltering in the litter. The forest barely even stirred. They were alone out here, like they always were until the moment they meant not to be, but that moment wouldn't be tonight. They were just looking. An aperture in the brush marked where they had to go. Stepping with care, they avoided snapping twigs or moving too much of the leaves, gloved hands steady on the aspens. The trill of the forest grew louder the deeper they went, frogs hopping out from underfoot and landing in a rustle, sleeping lungs taking their first waking breaths. The breeze picked up as the forest inhaled them, like something was just made aware of them. They scanned the ground for signatures of passage. The slightest dip of temperature in some winding pattern, they knew the wolves had been here. They saw it on the trail cam a few days ago. They saw her too. It wasn't tracks they found, but a set of warm color drops settled among grass. They glimpsed 3 yellow specks in the ground and curiously went closer, stooping through it in the ground. Something crunched beneath the boot. Below, it was a tattered spinal column fastened together by blackened fascia, barely visible out of the night. They touched the bones and the withered feet, dug the skull out of its own remains, but didn't extract it with its spine still attached. They just looked at it down in their hand. This must be what they were hunting. The hunter set down the prey of its prey and stepped out of the dip. They sought the spots again and found them. 5 spots in the grass. 5. Curious tilt of the head. They stepped. 6 spots out of the green thermal view. The newest burning white-hot, then rapidly cooling to red, orange, dull yellow. A 7th spot, and this time they saw the shape of it before it hit the ground, dripping. But nothing in their vision showed where it came from. 8th spot, coming toward them. Then the flicker of a body, suddenly so white in the goggles it blinded them. Not natural. Too close for comfort. Each time the image shuddered, the air shrieked and stilled again, breeding fear that outweighed their purpose here. They stumbled back, collapsing into the dip as Chris peed above them. The monstrous wolf took shape with snarling teeth, or wolf-like monster. It terrified them because they didn't know. Panicked, they scrambled out of the dip and crashed through the forest, and the monster crashed after them. Hours later, under the pale hum of a single bathroom bulb, he scrubbed his hands. Gushing water splashed off the inside of the sink, clots of red and sweet pink spinning into the drain. He leaned his elbows on the edge and picked the blood out from under his fingernails. He rubbed them, each time expecting to see the nail slide off his nail bed in a slime of blood and metamorphic ichor. It terrified him. Hand on his hip where he'd been bitten, he gave himself another dose of lupo-chitin just in case. Blood was everywhere. Its blood, steaming hot, black, it came out of a nightmare. Something was wrong with the wolves. His fingers shook over the gouge. He tossed the needle in the garbage and panted. Nothing was changing. Nothing would change. As long as she doesn't know. To point one, dog can't save you now. The next time Tim Mori saw Milo was 2 days later, Friday morning, the moment she stepped out of her geology class. He waved her down, freckles and hair and tallness making him difficult to miss. "How are you?" he asked. Tim Mori cleaved her attention between talking to him and dodging other students. "Oh, fine. I could go for a nap." He laughed above her head, one hand tucked in the front pocket of his pullover. "Don't fall asleep on me. You're the one taking notes for us." "Since when?" She sneered at him. "You don't remember." "I distinctly recall you saying, 'Sure, Milo. I'll take the notes if you read the text.'" "That can't be right, because I read the text and took notes. You read the text." Milo adjusted his backpack. "Good, because I didn't." Tim Mori scoffed. "If you can't keep up your end of the deal, then you aren't getting my notes. So we do have a deal." His rapid, fire mind games were both thrilling and vexing. Tim Mori looked bemused at him. "I don't know if I like this deal." She wasn't about to depend on Milo for important classwork. He was stupid if he thought he could depend on her taking notes for him. "How about you write your notes and I write mine? Then we compare them later." He smiled, which quickly threw her reservations into disarray. "Sure. Stupid Milo. Anyway, how's your little friend Quest going?" He shrugged. "Talked to a few people on Wednesday. I don't have classes Tuesdays or Thursdays. Aren't you taking a full course load?" "Yeah, but none of them are on Tuesdays or Thursdays." Hearing about his freedom made her bitterly jealous. "Hey, did you hear about what's going on at the Dieterich Suites next weekend?" His voice quirked enthusiastically, scratching her chin. Tim Mori mulled on it. "Oh yeah. We heard about it on the radio this morning. The Von Dieterich family's coming in for the grand opening, aren't they? It's supposed to be a huge thing." Milo's eyes lit up as he showed her an article about the event on his phone. Tim Mori leaned in and skimmed. She already knew about the planned office spaces. The building, with its immaculate white metal and glass architecture, stood out like a sore thumb among the colorful older buildings down Main Street. The style was signature to Hildebrandt von Dieterich, a local celebrity who, alongside Acadia University, was one of the few reasons anybody might have even heard of their little town. He wasn't even a native of it. The German architect moved to the hometown of his psychologist wife, and then left after she died. Some people boasted Wolfgall as the hometown of the von Dieterich family, regardless of the fact that they only lived there a few years. The article detailed the upcoming event and how the family was supposed to make an appearance for the grand opening next Saturday evening. Later, They were going to host a fancy reception that only those who donated to or participated in the construction of the designing and planning part. Of course, not the physical labor were invited to. Tim Mori didn't find it that interesting. It wasn't like she was going. Is the whole family gonna be there? She asked. Yeah. Hildebrand, Gerhard, Alex Felix, and Erica. Milo scrolled down the article, poring over photos of the building pre- and post-construction, as well as of the family smiling and waving. Are you going to go? Milo looked shocked. There's no way I'd get into that party. Maybe I'll go for the grand opening and watch. I'd like to see Erica in person. I heard she's actually really small. I hear she's possessed by a demon, said Tim Mori. There's this rumor that anytime you see Erica von Diederich when she's not doing some public appearance, something terrible happens. Like she's cursed. You know, like people say they go home with her but then wake up in the middle of the woods. Or how someone died. You heard about that? Right. Someone really died at a party she was at. Laughing, Milo put his phone away. They were nearly at the classroom. I mean, if you're constantly in the limelight like she is, you'd probably do crazy shit to get a little privacy. Or maybe all that stuff's just an accident. Maybe. Or she traded her soul to the devil for everlasting beauty. Tim Mori rolled her eyes. Jules really wants to go to that too. We should go together. Tim Mori kicked herself for divulging their plans. She was convinced that Milo would have lost interest in her, but now she wondered if he didn't even care about her. Maybe he just wanted to get in Julia's pants. I'll ask. She might have plans. I don't know what else you could be doing on a Saturday night that's more exciting than that. She shrugged, but by then they turned into the classroom and were looking for seats. I'll see, Tim Mori repeated and turned her attention to the professor. At lunch, Milo asked to join them again. Tim Mori made an excuse about how she and Julia were heading back to Julia's place for a quick 10-minute lunch because someone forgot something that they needed in the afternoon, and rejoined Julia at their customary meeting place. No Milo today, she asked, craning her neck to look for the tall boy. Nah. Busy, Tim Mori answered and brushed past Julia, guiding her in the direction of the parking lot. You want to get some burgers? There's no burger joint on campus. Let's go for a drive, she said. A woman on the radio started talking about the Diederich suites. Tim Mori turned the volume down and snuck a glance at Julia. You still good for our hike tomorrow? Yes, ma'am, she beamed. Then Gaston turned the radio back up. They're talking about next weekend, Julia interjected. Oh yeah, that, yawned Tim Mori. I was thinking we'd meet some friends at the boatswain later. Maybe one of the boys will be there, she suggested with a flirty wink. Sure, if Julia wanted to ditch Tim Mori to try to get laid by some socialite jerkhole. It sounded great. Tim Mori smiled thinly and bounced her hands on the steering wheel. Maybe she should invite Milo along. Maybe she wouldn't spend the night feeling alienated from people better versed in the bar scene than her. Or maybe Milo would ditch her to join Julia's pack of party animals. Why was it getting harder to tolerate people these days? Because you've done this to me before. Please don't abandon me again. To point to, dog can't save you now. Tim Mori didn't have any plans for the evening, but she'd arranged mostly so she could get a good sleep and early start. She had a checklist, but she and Julia had gone on so many hikes that by now the list resided in her mind permanently. Last on her list was lunch. In the kitchen, Tim Mori extracted the loaf and began 2 of her signature sandwiches, humming quietly to herself. The television chattered in the other room. Her mother was reclined on the sofa, but she didn't know where her father was until he popped his head into the kitchen. Cha-cha doin'? Tim Mori looked at him. Making lunches for tomorrow. What's tomorrow? We're going to the mountain, she said, laying slices of processed ham atop spirals of mustard. Can I come? Asked Wallace. Tim Mori snarked. We're gonna be hiking all day. Think you can handle it? Wallace raised his hand to his forehead and sighed. No, you're right. My old man legs would crumple after more than an hour of physical activity. She laughed. You going with Jules and her dog? Tim Mori nodded. What about that Milo fellow? The name drove ice down her spine. Tim Mori's eyes narrowed to green slits. I don't know a Milo. Her father said nothing. Instead, he held up her phone. Screen glowing with the newest text from Julia. Hey, you should invite Milo tomorrow. What? Give. Tim Mori grabbed the phone. Her father made no effort to keep it and she shoved it in her pocket, frowning. That's an invasion of my privacy. You left it face up on the sofa. He pointed out ugh. She scowled and resumed making sandwiches. The first one ended up floppy. Are you gonna invite him? What's he like? Why didn't you tell us about him? Attracted to the nature of the conversation, Tim Mori's mother drifted into the kitchen and leaned against the wall. He's just someone from class. It's nothing. I think he's kind of annoying. But whatever. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to invite him. Oh sure. Okay. Whatever you say. Tim grinned Wallace. She shot him a cold look, turning to her mother for support. He better not be one of those fuckboys. Christina threw up the air quotes. I hear you and Julia talking about, or he's going to be getting words from me. It was kind of support. Thank you, said Tim Mori, but he isn't. I don't hang out with fuckboys. If she could help it. Now she hoped Milo didn't prove her wrong. Is he cute though? Asked Wallace. No, said Tim Mori, yet you seem to be getting awfully flustered. Tim Mori put her knife down in annoyance. This familiar pressure made her want to storm off and snap. Can you just leave me alone? Yes, don't you have those listings to prepare for that law firm? 7 Hill. Christina pushed her husband out of the kitchen. Her real estate broker father snickered as he returned to his laptop in the living room, and Christina lingered only long enough to give her daughter a wink before disappearing after him. At least somebody understood her strife. Relationships had always been complicated for Tim Mori. Not because Tim Mori never had them, or had difficulty with them, or had too many of them. She'd had boyfriends, but they never lasted long. She just didn't have the patience for them. They made her feel suffocated. At one point, her parents thought it might be because Tim Mori was gay and showered her with promises of understanding, that they would love her no matter her sexual orientation, and she assured them that wasn't the case either, even though she really considered it. Julia. But ultimately, the issue was Tim Mori's personal privacy and Tim Mori's freedom that kept her single. As her parents' only child, they craved to see their daughter take those ever-important first steps in her life. Getting a significant other, a meaningful relationship, maybe something that could turn into a marriage that they could gab about. Living in a small town like Wolfville meant most of your gossip came from and was about the people closest to you. Unfortunately, it also made Tim Mori the primary target of her parents' snooping. She made a point of being uninteresting. Tim Mori finished preparing her lunch in peace, but after she left the kitchen, her father beckoned her again. Hey, watch your back out there. Okay. If you do end up inviting that Milo guy, he said, watching her pass through the living room. She groaned, trying to make it obvious that he aggravated her. Yeah, I love you too, sweetie. Wallace grinned. In the morning, Tim Mori rolled over and grabbed her phone, scrolling through social media before opening up the text from Julia from last night. She purposely failed to reply after making lunch. SRY, didn't see her text. I don't have his number. She enjoyed a quick shower, dried her hair and tied it up in a ponytail, then deliberated on what to wear. The heat from summer had yet to fade, but September mornings were still cold enough that she wanted to cover up her legs. She picked a pair of thin gray sweatpants She pulled up over jean shorts, then a green sweater wrapped around a low armpit tank perfect for keeping cool once the sun rose as they walked. A couple more shirts and another sweater made its way into her hiking pack in case she needed them. Her camera sat on top. The sun was barely touching the horizon as she prepared warm. Pink light flushed the kitchen window and illuminated the living room in pastel beams. She double-checked the various accoutrements clipped to her backpack straps, a flashlight, a pocket knife, a bottle opener, then sifted through its contents to ensure she had everything on her list, then retrieved the lunches from the fridge and tucked them inside. When she was ready to go, she checked the time and made for the back door, but paused when her phone vibrated. It was a new text from Julia. "That's too bad. Also, I'm really sorry, but I think I have to bail. Brutus is really sick this morning." Tim Morey lingered, staring at her phone. Her lips twitched at the corners, unsure what to make of the text, stifling anger. She knew it wasn't fair to be mad at Julia if her dog was ill. They needed the safety of Brutus to be able to hike the mountain, and if he was sick, Julia probably wasn't going to leave his side. But Tim Morey was looking forward to this. Tim Morey needed this. Those were her happy place. The only place where she could shrug off the weight of her pesky responsibilities and expectations and social stresses. She didn't realize how long she'd been standing there staring at her phone until she heard footsteps behind her. "You're leaving now?" her mother asked, wrapping herself in her robes. Tim Morey fumbled for a response. Without Julia, she couldn't go out. Even her own parents thought it best to take the dog, but it wasn't like they had to know. "Yeah, I was just waiting for Jules to text me back," she said, tucking the phone into her pocket. "Okay, be safe, sweetie." Christina pulled her daughter in for a hug. I will," she smiled and turned away. Tim Morey wasn't sure what she felt as she pulled her car out of the driveway and left the house. As she idled at a red light, she shot out a quick text to Julia. "Don't worry about it. Hope Paige okay. Thank you all so much for joining me on this dangerous werewolf journey. I hope you had your hearts pumping and your minds racing. Don't forget to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and come back for more exciting and dangerous tales. Until next time, stay safe and keep that adventurous spirit alive."